Let's take our Bibles tonight and turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. I know we kind of ended it a little bit in chapter 3, but we did read through the rest and begin to understand a little bit more about these seasons, about the vapor, about life. And Solomon gives us some practical words tonight. And I want us to begin reading in verse 1, read down through verse 12, and think a little bit about our relationships, because God is not only teaching us about our relationship with Him as we look at life, as we look at the challenge, as we look at the seasons that we go through, but also as you begin to kind of embrace where He goes, the things that God calls us to do and the priorities He places upon our life, but also our relationship with others. How our relationship with the Lord affects other people, the people that are around us the most. And I want us to think about this. It's real easy. Two are better than one. And that's true all except for the last time that we look. Let's look at chapter 4 and verse 1. Chapter 4 and verse 1 says, "Then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. And look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors there is power, but they have no comforter. Therefore I praised the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who has never existed, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. Again I saw that for all toil and every skillful work a man is envied by his neighbor. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Better a handful with quietness than both hands full together with toil and grasping for the wind. Then I returned and saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone without companion. He is neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labors. Nor is his eye satisfied with riches, but he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is vanity and a great misfortune. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him. And a threefold cord is not easily broken." The book of Ecclesiastes, what we see here is kind of a sad sequel to Proverbs. You could almost hear, maybe you could call it grief, maybe you could call it the tears that he mentions in verse 1, but you can understand that the book of Proverbs primarily consists of wise sayings that Solomon teaches his children, and that they may live a godly and peaceful life. But then in Ecclesiastes, he begins to lament the fact that he's played the fool, as he puts in this text, and failed to take his own advice. In Ecclesiastes chapter 1, let me remind you the first couple verses. He says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "vanity of vanities, all is vanity." So we see basically the beginning of a sermon, a study, not to waste our lives. There's a wonderful book I read many years ago about "Don't Waste Your Life." What an appropriate title. But what it did is it challenged us to see life, to see the seasons, to see the situations, the obstacles, the opportunities that God gives us. And I want us to look tonight and kind of hone in, kind of in the middle of our text tonight in chapter 4, and really consider basically verse 9 through verse 12. And I'll share with you how these all tie together. But Solomon teaches in order to have a life that counts, you got to learn to value relationships over possessions. You got to value people more than things. You must find joy in fellowship, not pleasure. If we've learned anything thus far, what has he told us? Well, these seasons come, and this life is a vapor, and the things that are passing away. But when we think about the souls, we think about our friends, we think about the opportunities that God gives us to invest in other people's lives. So in context, let's kind of tie it together just a little bit. Verse 7 and verse 8. They warn about isolation really. He says, in our return, I saw vanity in her son. There is one alone without companion. There's one alone without companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labors. In other words, he's going to work himself to death. There is nobody for this man. So he teaches us, hey, be careful about this isolation aspect. But also in verse 13 through verse 16, if you were to turn over and read the end of the chapter, he teaches us a little bit about this kind of superficial fame, if you would. Better a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king, who will be admonished no more. For he comes out of prison to be king, although he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who walked under the sun. They were with the second youth, who stands in his place. There was no end of all the people over whom he was made king. Yet those who come afterward will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and grasping for the wind. So grasping for the wind is a term that he uses more than once. It's 3 times even within this text. So what do you think about when you hear those words? Grasping at the wind. What are we doing? What is he describing? What's that?
Futile effort.
A futile effort. Okay. What else? Desperation. What's that?
Wishful thinking or wanting.
Wishful thinking, wanting, exactly. Okay, we're grasping at the wind. We're trying to reach for everything, but in the end we have nothing. And not only does he look at this isolation, but the other that seems to excel, that in the end has nothing. So he teaches us between those two, that two are better than one. And there's some times when we hurt, sometimes when we're betrayed, sometimes when we're forsaken by other people, and Solomon really does not ever address this, but he teaches us a little bit about our relationships with one another. Two are better than one. So let's kind of look at the issue that's at hand, kind of the opposing view of isolation, and it begins in verse 9. He teaches us a little bit more. In Proverbs, he says this, okay? Proverbs 18, verse 1. Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. In other words, isolation from those around you, isolation from others, is not only selfish and foolish, but it's ungodly. It's not designed to be that way. Matter of fact, God said, what did God say about poor Adam? Hey, he's alone, and what did he say? This is not good. This is not good. So he says, hey, I'm going to design Eve a helpmate for him, and we know that that's the best thing that ever happened for Adam. We know, and we look, and we say, well, God brings us, and he brings us into this relationship, and he teaches us about two is better than one. And he gives us 4 different reasons that I want us to kind of look at tonight for just a little while about two being better than one. One is when you're at work. When you're at work. Matter of fact, turn over there and look for just a few moments. He says in verse 9, 2 are better than one because they have good reward for their labor. If we were to turn back in chapter 10 and look at verse 10, there's a little bit more about that. If the axe is dull and one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength, but wisdom brings success. He teaches us a little bit about two. Two is better than one when we work. The point of this verse is it's better to work smarter and not harder. And I think he tells us, hey, do not work alone. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor, for their toil. The word here that we look at, the word that we begin to understand, labor. I know we all know what labor is. We could turn back and look at Adam and Eve. We can look at that first sin, and we can say, you know what, there's a reason we have to labor. There's a reason that life can be difficult. But he uses this term in a phenomenal way. He knows that if he does not work in his field, there'll be no harvest. He knows that if he does not, if he's not prodded to work, he desires to work because he wants the reward. He knows that if he doesn't labor in the field, his family will starve. He reminds us that cultivating a meaningful life is hard work. So we could look and we could say, well, what is he talking about? Is he talking about in their field? Is he talking about, hey, this labor, this good thing? Is he talking about this relationship? Or maybe just as we're cultivating in the field, we're cultivating in life. And he says, hey, two are better than one. And doing right is hard work. And we look and we say, well, we want to do better. We want to be together. And the text says there's a meaningful life of hard work. And I know we look and we could all share stories of times where God, it seems like things were just difficult. It may be financially, or it may be in your career, it may be in a stage of life. And God says, hey, keep working. And two are better than one, but he does not rule everything out, okay? We want to look because he's an affirmation. Psalm 130 says, two are better than one when you go to work. And most of us would realize when you got hard work, what happens to those around you? They do what? That's right. They scatter. They disappear. Someone asked me one day, hey, why don't your boys mow the yard? I said, well, I kind of like it mowing the yard. Matter of fact, nobody bothers me when I mow the yard. It's an amazing thing. When we think about working, sometimes we say, boy, it's easier to do it by ourselves. But we understand God says, hey, we're working at life together. And I think the meaning is far deeper than just tolling the field or laboring the field. The meaning is, hey, in life, relationships, it takes work, and the labor that comes is a labor of love. But he also teaches us something else. See, verse 9 makes a point that two are better than one in the picture of labor in the field. But verse 10 all the way through down verse 12 teaches us a little bit more. Two are better than one when you've fallen down. Some of y'all can relate to this. Okay, some of y'all, you haven't fallen in a while. Okay, so maybe I shouldn't say that, right? But here's what happens. He says, for if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Woe to him who is alone when he falls. There's nobody to help him up. So there's a common thread here in every person's life who stands, who puts one foot in front of the other. He says, you may fall. Now, we're not foolish enough to think that he's just talking about physically walking. So, man, in our relationships, we're going to fall. In our walks with the Lord, sometimes we fall. When we think about Solomon, he would have written this and he said, man, when they fall. It's not if they fall, but when they fall. And his wording, it doesn't diminish the gravity of the statement that is. In fact, it makes the fact all the more difficult to avoid. You may fall down. You will. And no matter how experienced you are at walking physically or spiritually or emotionally, you may still fall. No matter how skilled you are in walking, you may still fall. No matter how careful you are in walking, you still may fall. And in verse 10, he teaches us that. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls. Has nobody to lift him up. And Solomon says, hey, you're almost doomed if you're alone and you fall. Nobody's there to pick you up. Charles Swindoll said it this way. Friendships must be cultivated. They don't automatically occur when calamity strikes. And I've never heard of a rent-a-friend business either. So we can't be determined to walk alone. I know there are times in our life, just leave me alone. I've got this. And think about not physically, but spiritually with the Lord. Sometimes we tell God, I've got this. I'm okay. We're good. And God says, hey, you cannot do it alone. And there's going to be somebody there to help us when we fall. We realize friendships. We realize when we struggle, those people that speak into our life. And we cultivate these friendships while we're on our feet so that when we fall, hey, we help each other up. So not only when we work, not only when we walk, but also he uses one in here, and we're not going to dig too deep into it. In verse 11, when you're cold, all right? I know none of you are cold right now. Maybe you are. Maybe you were before you got here. It's hot. But in verse 11, again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. And how can one be warm alone? This verse speaks for itself, but there's a picture, okay? And I want to give you the picture, okay? Because we have walked through these other chapters and we have saw everything in its time. And Solomon, if Solomon could pour it out any clearer through his tears and through his lament, he said, okay, in life, okay, we're journeying through life. And not only when you work, not only you walk, but when you need to be warm, okay? The picture is of a traveler in a journey. And he walks down the road, and night catches up with him, and the path gets dark. It gets cold, and he has to find a place to be for the night. He says, man, if you're alone, it's hard. You stay warm stay together. But how can one be warmed alone? He's addressing the dangers of falling. He's addressing the dangers of freezing, and we need each other in life. And we need friendship. I don't know, I know people are at different stages, but when we first started meeting as a church, and it's still strange, Sunday morning I stood at the back door just like this. I wasn't being cold, but you never know. Some people don't want you to touch them. Some people want to shake your hand. Some people want to hug you. But I will tell you, there's warmth in physical touch. There are times of trial and turmoil, times of journeys in life, when we're in war, when we're in difficult times, as he talked about in chapter 3. And warmth, I mean the warmth of touch, of being held, of being wanted, and friendship, support, encouragement. You can put so many words there. Intercession, generosity. If you don't have that, you're kind of left out in the cold. And you need to develop and maintain that relationship. So we look, and there's three of them, okay? We're probably walking a little bit too fast. When we work, when we walk, when we need to be warm, but also a time when we're at war, okay? When we fight. And he talks about this a little bit in verse 12. Then one may be overpowered by another. Two can withstand him. And the threefold cord is not quickly or easily broken. So the scenario here, Solomon had in mind this final point that we kind of look at when we're at war. One might prevail against the one, but two. Man, if you've got one with you, if you've got a friend, and the statement kind of confronts us, but it also brings us comfort because we're going to be attacked. We're going to be attacked. Our little discipleship group that my wife and I had the opportunity to meet with, that's what we talked about this past Friday, is being attacked. And of course, physically, not many of us are attacked daily, okay? But spiritually, and the flames, the arrows, they come from places that we would never understand. And of course, we were looking and putting on the armor of God. But here he's teaching us, and he's saying, hey, when you're alone, man, it is hard. It is difficult. And attacks come. And sometimes they come from people you don't know. And even more it hurts when people that you do know, people that you love, people that maybe you thought were friends. And personal attacks can come from people that sometimes we even know well. And there are times in our life when we're attacked, when he says, hey, the one may be overpowered by another, but two can withstand. Two can withstand him. And you'll be attacked by people. And you'll be attacked by the prince of the air and the prince of this world. And you'll find these arrows in the places that maybe we don't expect it. Maybe a place we thought we had strength. And he says, but you need somebody there with you. You need a friend. You need somebody that'll lift you up. You need somebody that will care for you. You need someone that'll keep you warm. You need somebody that when you fall will pick you up. I like, speaking of the armor of God, in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 11 and 12, you don't have to turn over there. You're familiar with this text. It says, put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. Man, if we could communicate anything right now, if we could communicate to our world that the enemy, it's not us. It's not a us and them. It's him. And if we could communicate anything, the schemes of the devil, he says, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rules, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over the present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Our common enemy, the devil. Now, I know we all, I tell people sometimes I worked for the devil, okay? And you might say, I did too. But when we think about people in our life, sometimes we say, man, they just, that was him. I don't know, he didn't have horns. But we look and we say, you know what? Hey, the devil, he tries at every angle. And the forces that he controls, they're strategically working against us. Matter of fact, in our little discipleship group, the week before, we were talking and we looked and we learned a little bit because, man, when things are going good, you know what the devil's doing? He's just regrouping. And he desires to attack again. He wants to do everything we can to bring us away from the Lord. And sometimes our faith is even attacked. And it's hard. And you'll discover that spiritual victory oftentimes requires fellowship with others. The most dangerous place I ever see anybody is when they just want to be alone in a spiritual battle. Because they cannot win. It cannot. Matter of fact, I wrote down several different thoughts. There are some attacks you cannot face on your own. There's some battles you cannot fight on your own. There's some enemies you cannot defeat on your own. There's some attitudes you cannot change on your own. There's some habits you cannot break on your own. There's some problems you cannot solve on your own. There are some needs you cannot meet on your own. And Ecclesiastes 4 in verse 12 says, "And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him." Church ought to be the place where we find people who are with us, who have our back, who stand together when our faith is attacked. And as a Christian church, we can't promise when people get saved that the battle's not going to come because we realize everything is turned up. I mean, the devil, then you're the target, and he's aiming at you. But we can promise that, hey, we will be there with you. And when you read those verses, 9 through 12, he not only declares, but he defends this principle. Two are better than one. But then the end of verse 12, okay, those last little words, that last little phrase, it doesn't tear down everything we've looked at tonight, but it teaches us a little bit more, okay? It teaches us a little bit more. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. So the progression of the text, two are better than one. Three are even better. And one is the Lord. And when we build our relationships, this is a good marriage passage. I never realized this before I looked at it. When we build our relationships, hey, two, they're good. But if you want to remain, you've got to tie yourself to the Lord. You've got to, that cord has to be tied, that threefold cord. Vance Havner said it this way. Okay, Vance Havner used to speak through his nose. I almost want to try when I read his words, but he says, and I like this thought, the snowflakes are frail little things. I don't know if you were like me when you was a kid. Miss Teddy grew up north, but most of us didn't. You look, and down here, I don't know if you remember when we have snow, and you have to look up here. Why don't you look on the ground?
It's gone.
It's gone, right? He said this, I like this thought. The snowflakes are frail little things. But if you get enough of them, they can stop traffic. And there's power in unity with others. So when we think about our relationship with one another, we think about our relationship with the Lord, we think about our relationship with the church, we just multiply what Solomon was saying. It's also a statement about the power of faith. It's to hold on to what God is doing in our life.